Madam Secretary, your department is really at the front of the trust responsibility, and it's your effort that gets out there and weighs in to make sure the trust responsibility works in specific circumstances. And the first one I want to focus on is the wildfires in the West. In the last few years, New Mexico's been hit with record-breaking fires. We have, after the fires, we have flooding that's many times worse than the fires that occurred, and the watersheds are damaged, wildlife, all of that. And we're talking about, 46% of New Mexico federal land, another 11.3% tribal land. So my question is how is the Department of Interior coordinating with tribes in New Mexico and other states on fire preparedness, fire suppression, and post-fire remediation? Because it seems to me all of those things are absolutely crucial when we look at Indian country and that impact that wildfire has on it.
Thank you, Senator. I'm fresh back this week from a visit to the National Interagency Fire Center in Boise. And one of the things that was so striking about that visit was it truly is interagency. It is about triaging and fighting fires or putting resources where they need to be most for the landscapes without regard to who that land manager is. So the BIA was at the table, the U.S. Forest Service at the table, Bureau of Land Management, other agencies working collectively together, and it didn't matter what bureau or what department. So that, there is not enough money to go around for the fire risk that we face, and so we have to prioritize within that. Senator Tester had some similar issues that he raised. New Mexico, just in looking at the fire risk chart, is in serious shape in terms of dryness in multiple years of very low, very high temperatures and low water. And so we are aware of the risks throughout the West, but specifically to your state as well. The money is being prioritized for suppression. It does not support the longer-term needs, and we really need additional resources to do the longer-term needs of both prevention, which is hazardous fuels removal. It's also prescribed burns, which are controversial, but really an essential way of helping clear the landscape. The remediation, post-fire remediation, I can tell you specifically on BLM lands that we're only able to reseed a fraction of what actually burns. And when you think about sage-grouse habitat, for example, other critical habitats, if we don't get in and reseed, cheatgrass takes over and increases the fire risk. But there's not enough money to go around. So one of the things I'd love to see changed, and happy to work with the appropriate committees here, is to take firefighting, the emergency firefighting, out of our day-to-day budgets, because it makes it very difficult. Put that in an emergency fund so that we can really focus on long-term sensible management of our lands around fire, because it's not going to get better. It's going to get worse in a climate change situation.
No doubt about it. And it seems to me with all the different agencies that are in there when we're working with fires, if the Bureau of Indian Affairs was kind of the lead of coordinating and bringing together. I mean, sometimes, and this isn't to be overly critical of them, but there needs to be a coordination force in terms of pulling together those trust responsibilities throughout government. It may be beyond your department, but they need an advocate. Somebody needs to be saying to the federal government throughout, this is a responsibility. You need to get over here and help with this.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, please.
They do, and I was very encouraged. The representative from the BIA is assigned to a particular part of the country to manage all fire. The representative from U.S. Forest Service the same way. They don't treat tribal lands any different than any other lands. They treat all lands in a way that says what is the fire risk, not who is responsible or who is the agency manager. And I felt really good in speaking with the BIA representative there that we are not treating Indian lands any differently than other lands, that we're all working closely, and that also includes state and local fire responders. It is the most coordinated thing I have seen in government yet.
Yeah, I see I've run out of time, so are we doing?
Do you have a follow-up to that?
Well, I had an additional question,
Go ahead.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead,
but I
Senator
didn't know
Udall.
whether you're doing a second round. I don't want to deprive my colleague from North Dakota here for.
Go right ahead.
Okay. First of all, you started off with on the right foot, in my opinion, because you had a small group of tribal leaders in and met with them. I know one of them was Richard Luarqui, from the governor of Laguna Pueblo, and he very much appreciated be able to meet in the Secretary's office one-on-one, not one-on-one, but in a larger tribal setting roundtable and have a discussion with you and have a one-on-one with him in hearing about his tribal concerns. So thank you for doing that. I wanted to speak with you a little bit more. Issues have been raised on sequestration, but there's some big picture issues on sequestration that I think we're missing here, because I'm tremendously frustrated in our efforts to protect our nation's most vulnerable communities. I mean, one of the things that when we put the sequester in place is we said we were exempting the most vulnerable. We didn't really push on Medicare and in these other areas, and somehow we forgot about the tribes. So I don't know how we're ever going to get out of this sequester. We obviously have it in the current budget and are living with it, and many of us want to get out of it immediately, but we can't find a way, a bipartisan way, working with our colleagues. And so it seems to me whenever this is renegotiated, if we're coming up with the next budget cycle in October, that we need to remember that our tribal communities are the most vulnerable, and they should be exempted from something like this. And that's where I'm coming from on this. But could you give me just your big picture, your overall impressions of the sequester and what it's doing in Indian country? I can tell you, I see it in New Mexico, and it's absolutely devastating. Devastating to schools, to Head Start, to on and on and on the list goes.
Well, you have it right. It is devastating. It disproportionately impacts this budget because it's a more people-intensive budget. When you apply the sequester, it means you're reducing people, and it's also reducing payments to individuals. I think it's $2,400 individuals will have their payments stopped as a result of the sequester. It impacts Indian education. Nobody on this committee, clearly from the hearing so far, would argue that it's an under-resourced, challenged part of our responsibility that is very difficult to fulfill, and yet that got the same degree of cuts that other areas did as well. So there are real severe consequences. Larry, do you want to add any specific detail to to that?
I think there's a couple of concrete examples in terms of how sequestration is affecting Indian country. One of the long-term examples is that forest management plans, which we're working on with a goal mandated to have those in place by 2015. Obviously, we were on track to meet those. Sequestration has impacted those deadlines, and the impact of missing that deadline is that forest revenue isn't realized, and that current positions are going to be lost, the revenues generated by those forestry programs. More short term, an example that staff has shared with us is just dam inspections are at risk because we have fewer resources to conduct those inspections as we're making these cutbacks. And then just our sense is that also the realty functions that the Bureau performs, title functions, those are going to be impacted by sequestration, so that's going to really impact our fee to trust processing and those areas that are really important to the department.
Thank you, Secretary Jewell, and thank you, Larry. I will submit a few questions for the record on Salazar versus Rama, which you have a different approach on how to deal with that Supreme Court case. Also, energy development in Indian country, specifically renewables, and then the long-term plan and backlogs in terms of BIA. And let me just give a shout out to my friend Congressman Bill De La Hunt back there in the back, a great advocate for tribes, Madam Chair. And with that,
Thank you. Well, thank you, Secretary Jewell.